There's a sentence almost everyone has heard about compound interest, something about it being the eighth wonder of the world, and most people nod along, repeat it at dinner parties, maybe even believe it, without ever actually seeing the mechanism that makes it true. And that gap between hearing a phrase and understanding a mechanism is exactly where most people's money quietly underperforms for decades without them noticing. My name is Marcus, and this channel exists to close that exact gap, to take ideas everyone's heard of but almost nobody's actually seen broken down, and lay them out visually so the mechanics become obvious rather than mysterious. So if you've ever nodded along to a financial concept without fully trusting that you understood it, sticking around and subscribing will help make sure that stops happening. Most people think compound interest means their money grows a little faster than simple interest, a modest bonus on top of normal saving. They're completely wrong about the scale of it, because the actual mechanism isn't a bonus, it's a multiplier that behaves almost nothing like linear growth once enough time is allowed to pass. And the reason most explanations fail to convey this is that they show the formula without ever showing what the formula actually does across decades. Start with the baseline everyone already understands, simple interest, where growth is calculated only on the original amount deposited, year after year, a flat, predictable, straight line. If someone deposits $10,000 and earns simple interest at a fixed rate, the dollar amount earned every single year stays identical because the calculation never looks at what's already been earned, only at the original principal. That's intuitive, it's linear, and it's precisely the mental model most people unconsciously carry into their thinking about compound interest as well, which is where the trouble begins. Compound interest changes one variable in that calculation, and it's a small change with enormous consequences. Instead of calculating growth only on the original principal, it calculates growth on the original principal plus every dollar of growth that's already accumulated. In year one, this looks almost identical to simple interest. The difference is barely visible. But by year two, the account is earning interest not just on the original deposit, but on the interest from year one as well, meaning the base the calculation works from is quietly larger every single year, and each year's growth is being calculated on a bigger foundation than the year before, the financial equivalent of a snowball that doesn't just roll forward, but grows in size every rotation, meaning it picks up more with each turn than it did on the turn before. Here's where this gets genuinely interesting, because in the first several years, compound and simple interest produce results that look nearly identical, close enough that a person glancing at their account might reasonably wonder what all the fuss is about. This is precisely why compounding has a reputation problem. Its early behavior doesn't match its reputation. It looks slow, ordinary, barely worth mentioning, right up until the accumulated growth becomes large enough to start meaningfully increasing the base itself, at which point the gap between compound and simple interest stops being subtle and starts becoming the dominant factor in the entire outcome. Consider what happens to that same $10,000 over a genuinely long horizon, several decades, held at a reasonable long-term average rate of growth. Under simple interest, the ending balance is a straightforward multiple of the original deposit, easy to predict, easy to calculate by hand. Under compound interest, the ending balance can be several times larger than the simple interest outcome, not because the rate was different, but purely because each year's growth was calculated on an ever-expanding base rather than a fixed one. The breakdown at this stage always follows the same pattern worth remembering. A portion of the final total is the money originally deposited, and a progressively larger portion, the longer the horizon runs, is growth generated by growth itself, money that was never directly contributed by the saver at all. This reveals something most explanations skip entirely. In the compound interest formula, time isn't just one input among several. It functions almost like a second interest rate. Doubling the rate of return roughly doubles the growth contribution in a given year, but extending the time horizon has a compounding effect on the compounding itself, because more years means more cycles where growth gets added to a base that then generates its own growth. This is why financial explanations so often emphasize starting early over starting large, not as motivational language, but because the mathematics genuinely reward time differently than they reward the size of any single contribution. This has real weight for anyone who feels like they started saving too late or don't have enough to contribute right now, because the instinct is to feel behind, to assume the only lever available is contributing more money faster. But understanding the actual mechanism reframes the picture. Consistency and time working on even a modest base can outperform larger later contributions purely because of how many cycles of growth on growth get to occur. This isn't a promise about outcomes, it's simply how the mechanism behaves mathematically, and knowing that changes which decisions actually matter most. Someone might reasonably ask, doesn't a market downturn interrupt this entire process and reset the base lower? It's a fair concern, and a downturn absolutely can reduce the account balance temporarily. But the compounding mechanism itself doesn't stop functioning during a downturn. It simply operates on a smaller number for a period. And for anyone continuing to contribute through that period, new deposits are adding to the base at a lower entry cost, which means the eventual recovery compounds from a position that was, in a specific sense, quietly strengthened rather than damaged by the timing of the decline. So when people call compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, what they're actually pointing at, whether they realize it or not, is this one structural detail. Growth calculated on growth, repeated across enough cycles, stops behaving like addition and starts behaving like something closer to multiplication. It's not a secret, and it's not magic. It's a formula anyone can look up in under a minute. But seeing what that formula actually does across real time, rather than just knowing it exists, is the difference between trusting the process during the slow, uneventful early years and abandoning it right before the mechanism was about to start doing the heaviest part of the work.